Welcome to the condensed version of my presentation on introductions and conclusions. I will start with the logical beginning, which is, of course, the introduction. So introductions are important because they're all about setting the stage for your reader. Introductions provide relevancy for your topic and give your reader some context so that they have a specific perspective from which to view the topic that you're addressing in your paper. Now, when you have a limited understanding, when you have a limited context, then things don't really make sense. You don't really know why the writer is bringing something up unless they provide context. So, for example, this picture of this flower with the bees on it, if you were just to see this without context, maybe you would think, oh, well, it's really a very pretty picture of a flower, not really that important. But if I tell you that this flower is actually going extinct and that these bees are helping to perpetuate a dying species of water lily, then suddenly this picture has a lot more meaning. So that's what I mean by helping to establish relevancy through context in your introductions. If I don't know why something is important, then I'm not invested as a reader. And if I don't have enough information to tell me what is and is not important in this specific situation, then I don't know how to prioritize and evaluate the information that the writer is giving me. So, introductions are very important. The first step to writing an introduction is to create a very engaging hook. Now, you can start with a question, you can start with a quote, a surprising statistic, you could tell a brief story, or maybe vary your sentences with a very short sentence in the beginning, a very short direct sentence. But what you really want to do is avoid some pitfalls. It's very easy to fall into a cliche when you're writing a hook. For example, if you choose to ask a question, try to avoid questions that have obvious answers. For example, if you're writing an essay about friendship, don't start off with, have you ever had a friend? Because first of all, it's very trite. Unless you have been locked up in a room for most of your life, I would hope that you would have at least one friend. And if you don't, then you probably have a lot more serious issues and maybe wouldn't be reading this essay. You want to start with something more complex. Um, Something like, have you ever thought of a definition of friendship that includes people you have never met? And then you can very logically go into the idea of social media friendships and how you've never met them in person, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't form strong bonds. And then you're automatically entering into the conversation of your paper, and you're opening up an opportunity for you to provide context. So the brief context that you want to give to your audience is just simply stating the various ideas that you're going to be touching on in your essay, and telling the reader how you expect them to connect. So you're just going over a brief summary of what you're about to tell them and connecting the ideas very loosely so that later when you go into it in your essay, they'll already have an idea of the relationships you're trying to defend and outline. Now, the last part of this is actually the most important. The thesis is absolutely the most important sentence in your essay. It is your stance, it is your main idea. It is the one sentence, and it is one sentence, and it's not a question, that tells the reader exactly what you are trying to prove through writing this essay. So, a lot of times a thesis will provide your reader with a relationship. So, if you're doing compare and contrast, you might have a thesis statement that uses an although phrase. So, although social media is very helpful for businesses that want to create a large following, it is not always successful because there are bad reviews or because some customers may feel spammed or overwhelmed by the amount of advertising that is on social media. So you can set it up like that. Or if you're doing something that's more cause and effect, you could say, something along the lines of maybe most people lie when they portray themselves on the internet, and therefore it breaks down the integrity of virtual communities. So your thesis is really a good opportunity for you to tell your reader exactly what is going to be important in your essay and to take a definitive stance on the topic that you're addressing. So take a moment right now, and if you haven't written your introduction, go ahead and write it. And if you have, go through and make sure that you have each of these things. Do you have an engaging hook? Is it something that's going to capture your reader's attention? Have you summarized the major points in your essay? Have you related that summary using transitions? And do you have a clear, identifiable thesis that shows your stance on the topic? So very important to make sure that you have all of these things because you will be graded on them on your final essay. So of course, all of this is related to establishing relevancy, and when you have a good introduction, that's exactly what you do. And it's very important because then the ideas that you're bringing up carry more weight. So I'd say that I really spend probably about 80% of my time writing on the introduction because it is so important. It's like the first impression that your reader gets of you as a writer. So the last impression is also important. Conclusions or closing the curtain on the topic are very important because people typically remember the first thing and the last thing that you say, and especially the last thing that you say in a paper. Um, so I have a couple of hints for you when you're writing your conclusion. Think of your conclusion as your parting shots, as your last words. So I know in movies and film, they often dramatize a character's last words. For instance, Oscar Wilde's last words were either "this wallpaper goes" or "I do." And it's really emblematic of who he was as an author, as a comedian of his time. So last words are especially important because they carry more weight than the rest of your essay. It's the last thing that you're giving to your reader, and so it's sort of your opportunity to say, okay, in case you missed it, here is what I wanted you to get from this essay. So the way that you do that is you actually do your introduction, but in reverse. You restate your thesis. You don't want to repeat, copy and paste your thesis. You want to refine it. Now that they've read your entire paper, how should they view your stance differently? Then you want to give a brief summary explaining all the different reasons that you used to back up your stance. And then you want to give what I like to call a reverse hook. A reverse hook is really essentially just a punchy ending. And there's a couple different ways that you can do a reverse hook. I would suggest not using a quote because I feel as though the last thing your reader should see are your words. You're the author, it's your paper, you want them to remember what you had to say. So for me, I think that a reverse hook is something that ends with a note of hope or despair, something that either inspires your reader about your topic or kind of calls them to action to change something about what you've been discussing. Um, for instance, if you're writing about friendship, maybe you could say something along the lines of, um, everyone has friends, but it's really how we maintain our connections with those friends that establishes their longevity. So you're calling your audience to action there. You're saying, you need to consistently renew your connections with your friends in order to maintain and keep them. So reverse hook is really just a nice little punchy way to end your paper, a nice note to end on so that they'll say, oh, that's right, this paper is about moving forward and taking action with my friendships. Or, it's like a final word that'll help them understand exactly what you were trying to accomplish with your paper. So once again, if you haven't written your conclusion, go ahead, write your conclusion, and make sure that you have each of these things. The summary, I think, is less important than having a really good, refined thesis. Transitions, of course, are always good for tying your thesis into your call to action or your ending of hope or despair. And transitions are really essentially good for all writing because they tie your ideas, they connect your ideas together. So I hope that you've learned something about introductions and conclusions through this presentation, and that if you have any questions about framing your conversation, because your essay is essentially a conversation, that you will contact me, and hopefully I will be able to see you all tomorrow. Okay? Thanks.